Dawes Kerrigan carried the old widow's carpetbag a mile in the June dust of a Denver afternoon, in his one good coat, and thought nothing more about it than that a woman with a bad hip should not carry her own bag when a man was standing 3 feet away with 2 working arms. He had walked out of the Denver stockyards after selling 12 yearlings at fair price, and had been crossing the platform to the boarding hotel 2 blocks north when he had seen her. She was in her 60s. She wore a plain black bombazine dress. She had a bad hip and a walking stick. Her carpetbag was heavy. She had asked politely at the porter's window for a boy, and had been told, kindly, that the porters were all on the 2 o'clock express. She had smiled and said she would manage. She had picked up her carpetbag and lifted it 3 inches and set it down again. Dawes Kerrigan had walked over. "Ma'am," he had said. "Where to?" She had looked up at him. She had blue eyes. "To my cousin's boarding house at 14th and Larimer. It is not far." "It is a mile. It is a mile." "It is not far," she had said, "but I would be obliged for a moment's help with the bag. I would pay a fair porter's price." He had lifted the bag. It weighed 40 pounds. He had said, "Ma'am, please put your hand through my elbow. I am your porter." She had looked at him a moment. Then she had said, "Sir, I am obliged." She had put her hand through his elbow. They walked the mile in the June dust. He held the carpetbag in his free hand. She rested her hand through his elbow. He walked at her pace. They spoke, when they spoke, about the day's weather and about the corn crop, and about the fact that the Denver boarding hotels were charging $1.40 a night this summer, and were not shy about it. At 14th and Larimer, she pointed to a plain brick boarding house with a white porch. He walked her up the porch. He set the carpetbag by the door. She said, "Sir, what is your name?" He said, "Dawes Kerrigan, ma'am. I run a small cattle ranch at Long Meadow, 40 miles north of the city. I was in for the stockyards. You are welcome." She said, "My name is Cornelia Weatherby. I am obliged to you." He said, "You are welcome, Mrs. Weatherby." He tipped his hat. He would not take the 2-bit piece she tried to give him. He walked back to his boarding hotel in the dust. He caught the 4 o'clock train home. He did not think about her again. The letter came 3 months later on a September afternoon. Dawes Kerrigan rode into the town of Long Meadow for the weekly mail, and found, among his usual seed catalogs and stockyard notes, a stiff cream-colored envelope with a Denver postmark and a woman's neat address in it. He read the letter on the porch of his cabin at dusk, with a cup of coffee going cold beside him. Mrs. Weatherby wrote in a fine, even hand. She had not, she said, forgotten his kindness in June. She had thought about it several times a week since. She had not known, on the platform, that a plain rancher would carry a plain widow's bag a mile in the dust in a good coat, without a word about being repaid. She had known men who lived on 14th Avenue who would have stepped over her. He had not. She had wondered, at his back as he walked home, whether he was married. She had asked a cousin at the bank the following week whether a man called Dawes Kerrigan of Long Meadow was known to Weatherby's bank. Her cousin had said yes, and had said he was a good customer, and had said he was widowed 2 years, and had said he was 34, and had said he had a plain, honest holding of 1 section and 40 head, and had said he had no children. She had thought about this for 2 months. She had also thought about her niece Ruth Blaine, 28, unmarried, who had been keeping her uncle's books at the bank for 6 years, and who had told Cornelia, over tea, 3 times in the last year, that she was tired of the city and wanted a country life, and did not know how to get one. Cornelia had thought about Ruth. She had thought about Mr. Kerrigan. She had thought about both together. She was, she wrote, an old widow. She did not, she wrote, presume. But she had come to the point in her life where she was willing to say a thing she thought needed saying, and to be answered honestly, and to have the 2 persons involved thank her or curse her. She was writing to ask Mr. Kerrigan whether he would consider corresponding with Ruth Blaine with a view to a possible arrangement of the ordinary respectable sort. If he was willing, Ruth was willing. Ruth would write him a first letter within the week. She was a plain, honest woman, with a good head for numbers and a plain, kind face. Cornelia would pay Ruth's fare in either direction if things came to that. She asked, she wrote, only that Mr. Kerrigan write back honestly, yes or no, no further correspondence obligated. She signed it, Cornelia Weatherby. Dawes Kerrigan set the letter down on the porch board. He read it again by lamp after supper. He wrote back that night. He wrote it 3 times. He kept the plainest of the 3. He wrote, Mrs. Weatherby, I was surprised by your letter, and I have thought about it a great deal since dark. I would be honored to correspond with Miss Blaine. I am not looking for a wife, but I have missed my Nell every day for 2 years, and I have come to know that a plain, honest household is the only country I know how to keep. If Miss Blaine is willing to correspond with a plain man, and a plain small holding, and a plain slow spring, I would like the letters. I promise your niece and your family courtesy. I will not in any correspondence press for more than what a person can plainly give. Your servant, Dawes Kerrigan. He mailed it in the morning. Ruth Blaine's first letter came 10 days later. She wrote well. She wrote as a person who thought clearly. She wrote about her work at the bank, which she liked but was tired of. She wrote about her father, a Denver dentist, who had died 2 winters back, and about her mother, who lived quietly with a sister and did not need Ruth at home any longer. She wrote about her Aunt Cornelia, who was a very determined old woman and had a way of arranging small pieces of Denver until the small pieces obeyed her. She wrote that she had been asked 100 times by well-meaning uncles whether she would like to marry a Denver banker or a Denver lawyer or a Denver druggist. She wrote that she had said no each time. She wrote that when her aunt had told her about the plain rancher at Long Meadow, the man who had carried the carpetbag a mile in the dust without expecting a coin, she had, for the first time in 6 years, said, "Tell me more." She wrote, "I do not know you, Mr. Kerrigan. I would like to. I would ask you to write me plainly. I will write you plainly. If either of us finds by the 10th letter that we would rather not, we shall say so plainly, and it will be the end of it. And I hope we shall each of us think the correspondence was a good use of a winter. Your correspondent, Ruth Blaine." Dawes Kerrigan sat at his plank table by the lamp and read that letter 3 times. He wrote back that night. 10 letters passed between Long Meadow and Denver, over the fall and into the winter. They were plain letters. They spoke of the ordinary things of 2 ordinary honest lives. He wrote her about calving. She wrote him about the ledger. He wrote her about his Nell. A paragraph. Honest. She wrote him about the fiancé she had lost to typhoid at 20. A paragraph. Honest. He wrote her about the small stone wall at the corner of his pasture, and about the aspen grove he had planted for Nell. She wrote him about the small garden she kept at her mother's Denver house, and about the fact that she read Trollope in the evenings. By the 14th letter, he asked her plainly whether she would come out for a fortnight in the spring to see the ranch, and to see him, on the understanding that either of them at the end of the fortnight could say, "I would rather not," without any reproach on either side. She wrote back plainly yes. Cornelia Weatherby wrote him separately to say she was pleased, and would pay Ruth's fare, and would send a chaperone, her cousin's daughter, Miss Prue Weatherby, 31, unmarried, sensible, willing to sit at a plank table and mend for a fortnight, without pretending she wasn't a chaperone. Ruth Blaine arrived at Long Meadow Depot at 3 o'clock on the first Wednesday of May, and Dawes Kerrigan was on the platform in his one good coat with his hat off and his heart in his mouth. He had built a mental picture of Ruth Blaine over 8 months of letters. Her actual person was not that picture. She was taller. Her hair was darker. Her face was plainer and stronger. She saw him. She stopped on the boards a moment. She lifted her chin. She said, "Mr. Kerrigan." He said, "Miss Blaine." She said, "Aunt Cornelia sends her love." He said, "Please thank her." She said, "I have brought Prue. Prue is over there behind me with the trunks, and will pretend not to see us if we would like a moment." Dawes Kerrigan looked at Prue. Prue nodded gravely and turned to inspect the depot boards. He said, "Miss Blaine, may I take your bag?" She said, "Yes." He took her bag. He took her elbow. He walked her to the buckboard. Prue took Ruth's other elbow at the buckboard and settled herself and the trunk on the second bench and said, "Mr. Kerrigan, please drive at whatever pace suits your team. I am here to be a plain, sensible chaperone. and not to be delivered fast. Dawes said, "Yes, Miss Weatherby." He drove at his mule's ordinary pace. It was 5 miles to the ranch. They did not speak much on the drive. Ruth looked at the country. Dawes looked at his mules. Prue looked at both of them. At the ranch, he showed Ruth the small guest room he had newly painted himself the week before, and the small parlor, and the small kitchen, and the porch step. Ruth took her bonnet off in the guest room and put her hand along the plain painted wall, and did not say anything for a moment. Prue, in the doorway, said, mildly, "Ruthie." Ruth said, "I am well, Prue, I am well." Prue said, "Then come to supper." The fortnight went the way a fortnight goes when both people have written 10 careful letters and mean what they wrote. She saw the ranch. She saw the plank table. She saw the small stone wall at the corner of the pasture and the aspen grove. She met old Hank, the foreman, and young Silas the hand. She rode with him out to the far pasture on his gentle mare, and did not once complain when the sun raised freckles across her nose. She sat at his plank table each evening and asked him plain questions about the ledger of the ranch, questions from a banker's niece, careful and shrewd, and he answered them plainly. Prue mended a bolt of muslin on the porch each afternoon and pretended she was not chaperoning. On the 6th evening, at the end of supper, Ruth put her hands flat on the plank table and said, "Dawes Kerrigan." He said, "Ruth Blaine." She said, "I have come out for a fortnight. I have been here 6 days. I have made up my mind. I do not want to waste another 8 days pretending I have not. If you have made up yours, I would like you to say so. If you have not, please say so, and I will finish the fortnight in Denver, and thank you for the hospitality, and thank Prue for the mending." Dawes Kerrigan looked at his own hands. He said, "Ruth, I have made up mine. I have made it up since the 3rd letter. I have made it up harder in 6 days. I would like to marry you." She said, "Yes." Prue, on the porch, said, without turning, "Thank the good Lord." The circuit preacher married Dawes Kerrigan and Ruth Blaine in the parlor of the Long Meadow Ranch on the last Sunday of May. Old Hank stood witness for Dawes. Prue Weatherby stood witness for Ruth. Cornelia Weatherby herself came up from Denver in a private car and sat in the parlor in a fine gray silk dress and cried, once, into her handkerchief at "I do," which was more than Prue had seen her cry at any funeral in 20 years. Afterward, on the porch, Cornelia Weatherby put both her hands on Dawes Kerrigan's rough hand and said, "Young man." He said, "Mrs. Weatherby." She said, "You carried my bag a mile in the June dust without a word. I have watched Ruth for 6 years, and I have watched 3/4 of Denver for 40. Of the men I have watched, only one of them would have carried my bag. It was you. I did not arrange this. I opened a door. The 2 of you walked through. I want you to know, I understand the difference." Dawes Kerrigan said, "Ma'am, thank you." She said, "Bring your wife to Denver at Christmas. I will feed you both properly." He said, "We will come." 2 years on a warm October evening at the Long Meadow Ranch, Ruth Blaine Kerrigan sat on the porch step with Dawes Kerrigan beside her and their small son Charlie, asleep against her chest. Charlie was 6 months old and had his mother's straight jaw and his father's steady gray eye. Ruth had, in 2 years, turned Dawes's plank table ledger into a small model of Denver bookkeeping, had put in a proper set of ranch accounts, and had, quietly, arranged the ranch's 2nd largest cattle deal of the fall with a Kansas buyer she had corresponded with through the winter, without telling Dawes until the check came in the mail. Dawes said, "Ruth." Ruth said, "Dawes." He said, "The check from the Wichita buyer came in today." Ruth said, "I know." He said, "It is $130 over what old Hank thought we could get." Ruth said, "132. Dawes laughed. He kissed the top of her head. He kissed the top of Charlie's head. The pasture went yellow under the October sun. Somewhere behind them, old Hank was singing a hymn in the bunkhouse in his cracked old bass. Somewhere in Denver, Cornelia Weatherby was writing them her weekly Sunday letter. And Ruth Blaine Kerrigan, whose plain honest aunt had watched a plain rancher carry a plain widow's bag a mile in the June dust, and had decided that a plain rancher who did that once would do it every day of a good marriage. Put her cheek against her husband's cheek and understood that the good slow country had, in its good slow way, made her aunt right for the 400th time in 40 years, and had made a whole small house at Long Meadow out of 40 pounds of Denver carpetbag. And so it had.